In the early hours of a cold European morning during the Second World War, the quiet countryside suddenly erupted with the distant rumble of aircraft engines. Above the sleeping fields and narrow roads, hundreds of transport planes crossed the dark sky in tight formation. Inside those aircraft sat young American paratroopers, many barely in their 20s, gripping their gear and checking their parachutes as red warning lights glowed inside the cabins. They knew their mission was dangerous. Their orders were simple but terrifying. Drop behind enemy lines and capture a small but critical town that controlled the crossroads of several major German supply routes. When the green jump light flashed, the soldiers hurled themselves into the darkness one by one. Parachutes blossomed across the night sky like pale flowers drifting toward the earth. But the drop was far from perfect. German anti-aircraft fire tore through the sky, and many paratroopers landed miles from their intended zones. Some landed in forests, some in flooded fields, and others directly among surprised German patrols. Chaos spread instantly. Yet despite the confusion, the scattered American soldiers began moving toward their objective, guided only by distant gunfire, and the determination drilled into them during months of brutal training. By sunrise, small groups of paratroopers had gathered inside the town. The place seemed quiet at first, almost eerily calm. But intelligence reports soon confirmed the worst possible news. 2 German Panzer divisions were moving toward the town. Hundreds of tanks, armored vehicles, and thousands of experienced troops were advancing fast. Against them stood fewer than 1,000 lightly armed American paratroopers with limited ammunition and almost no heavy weapons. Retreat was impossible. Reinforcements were far away, so the paratroopers made a decision that would become legend: ammunition. They would hold the town, no matter what came down the road. As the morning fog slowly lifted, the American paratroopers worked quickly to turn the quiet town into a fortress. Machine guns were positioned in upper-floor windows. Sniper teams climbed into church towers and rooftops, and anti-tank weapons were carefully hidden behind rubble and stone walls along the narrow streets. Every building became a potential strong point. Every alleyway was prepared as a deadly ambush zone. The soldiers understood that their only advantage was the terrain. Tanks were powerful in open ground, but inside a tight European town filled with sharp corners and narrow streets, even the most feared Panzer could become vulnerable. The first sign of the approaching enemy came as a distant rumbling sound that vibrated through the cobblestone streets. Soon German reconnaissance vehicles appeared along the main road leading into town. They moved cautiously, expecting only light resistance from scattered airborne troops. What they did not expect was the sudden explosion that ripped apart the lead-armored car when an American bazooka team fired from behind a collapsed wall. Within seconds, the quiet street erupted into chaos. Machine guns thundered from hidden positions, while grenades rained down from upper windows. The stunned German troops scrambled for cover, realizing too late that the town was far more heavily defended than they had believed. Smoke and dust filled the air as the first German attack collapsed under the fierce resistance. But this was only the beginning. Behind those reconnaissance units came the real threat. Columns of German tanks and armored vehicles were already advancing toward the town from multiple directions. The Americans had scored the first victory, but they knew it would not stop what was coming next. 2 full Panzer divisions were on the move. By midday, the horizon trembled with the unmistakable sight of German armor advancing across the countryside. Long lines of Panzer IV and Panther tanks rolled forward with mechanical precision, their engines roaring like thunder across the fields. Behind them marched thousands of German infantry, supported by artillery batteries that soon began pounding the edges of the town with devastating force. Shells slammed into buildings, sending bricks and glass flying through the air. Entire streets disappeared beneath clouds of dust and smoke. Inside the town, the American paratroopers braced themselves. Many had never faced tanks before. Their primary anti-tank weapons were bazookas, effective, but only at dangerously close range. To destroy a German tank, a soldier often had to wait until it was just a few dozen meters away. That meant standing firm while a massive armored vehicle rolled directly toward you, its machine guns blazing and its cannon ready to fire. Yet the paratroopers refused to panic. They knew their survival depended on discipline and timing. When the first German tanks entered the town, they advanced cautiously, expecting resistance but confident in their overwhelming strength. Suddenly, from behind a destroyed truck. A bazooka fired. The rocket streaked across the street and slammed into the side armor of a Panzer IV, erupting in a violent explosion that halted the tank instantly. Moments later, another rocket struck a second tank from a hidden alleyway. Flames shot from the turret as the crew scrambled to escape. German infantry rushed forward to support their armor, but they were met with deadly crossfire from the surrounding buildings. What followed was brutal, close-quarters combat. Tanks fired point-blank into houses while American paratroopers darted through backyards, cellars and shattered streets to strike again and again. The town became a maze of ambushes where courage, speed and determination mattered more than armor. And despite facing two powerful panzer divisions, the outnumbered paratroopers were beginning to prove something extraordinary. They were not going to give up the town without a fight. By the afternoon of the first day, the Americans faced a terrifying reality. Ammunition was running dangerously low. Many soldiers had already used most of their bazooka rockets, and rifle ammunition was being carefully rationed. Supply drops were impossible while German forces surrounded the town. Still, morale remained surprisingly strong. The paratroopers had trained for chaos like this. They improvised constantly, using captured German weapons, scavenging ammunition from fallen enemies, and reusing grenades when possible. In one street, a small group of American soldiers used a destroyed truck as a barricade while firing captured German machine guns back at advancing infantry. Elsewhere, a lone bazooka gunner waited nearly an hour for the perfect shot before destroying a Panther tank, attempting to force its way through the square. The Germans believed they were crushing a small airborne unit. Instead, they were facing soldiers who refused to retreat. As the day continued, German officers grew increasingly frustrated. Every attack seemed to stall inside the town. Tanks were powerful in open fields, but here they were blind and vulnerable. American paratroopers hid in basements, attics, and behind shattered walls. German infantry had to move slowly, clearing buildings one by one. But every time they advanced, hidden machine guns suddenly opened fire. Snipers targeted officers and radio operators, disrupting German coordination. By evening, the German commanders realized something alarming. A small group of airborne soldiers had completely stalled the advance of two powerful panzer divisions. The town, that should have been captured in hours, had turned into a nightmare battlefield. When darkness finally fell, the fighting did not stop. Instead, it became even more terrifying. The ruined streets were lit only by burning vehicles and shattered buildings. Shadows moved everywhere. American paratroopers used the night to reposition and strengthen their defenses. Small patrols slipped through the rubble, setting up new ambush points and quietly eliminating German sentries. For the Germans, the darkness brought confusion. Every sound in the night could be an enemy soldier moving through the ruins. Sleep became impossible. At dawn, German artillery opened fire with renewed intensity. Shells crashed into the town for nearly an hour, destroying buildings and sending massive clouds of dust into the sky. When the bombardment stopped, German tanks rolled forward again, supported by waves of infantry. The attack was larger and more organized than anything the paratroopers had faced before. Yet once again, the Americans held their ground. Bazooka teams waited until the last possible moment before firing. Machine guns hammered advancing infantry while snipers picked off officers. The Germans advanced, but slowly. Every meter of ground came at a heavy cost. By midday, the battle had turned into brutal close-quarters combat, Fedios mortar. German infantry began fighting room to room with American paratroopers inside shattered buildings. Grenades exploded in stairwells, rifle fire echoed through hallways. Soldiers sometimes fought only a few feet apart. Despite the chaos, the Americans used their mobility to their advantage. Small squads constantly shifted positions, preventing the Germans from establishing control. The town refused to fall. Among the defenders was a bazooka gunner, who would become legendary among his fellow soldiers. Throughout the battle, he moved through the ruins with his small team, hunting German tanks. Using debris and smoke as cover, he destroyed several armored vehicles that attempted to enter the central streets. Each burning tank created a new obstacle for German forces. His actions slowed the panzer divisions even further. Realizing direct assaults were failing, German commanders attempted to surround the town completely. Their plan was simple: cut off the Americans and wait until they ran out of ammunition and food. But the paratroopers refused to surrender. They continued launching small surprise attacks, disrupting German positions and preventing the enemy from fully securing the area. The battle dragged on. Far behind enemy lines, Allied commanders finally realized how critical the situation had become. Reports confirmed that a small airborne force was holding back 2 German armored divisions. Relief forces were ordered to move toward the town as quickly as possible, but they still needed time. Time the paratroopers had to buy with their lives. On the 3rd day, German forces launched one final massive assault. Tanks, infantry, and artillery struck the town simultaneously from multiple directions. Buildings collapsed, streets filled with smoke and debris. Yet even in this chaos, the American defenders refused to break. Just as German forces prepared for another breakthrough attempt, a distant sound echoed across the battlefield. Engines. Dozens of Allied vehicles were approaching from the west. Relief forces had arrived. When the battle finally ended, the results shocked both sides. A small group of American paratroopers had held an entire town against 2 powerful panzer divisions for several days. Their defense delayed the German advance and allowed Allied reinforcements to arrive. What began as a desperate mission had become one of the most remarkable defensive stands of the war.